Hey, today I'm going to be showing you the best dungeon farms that you can possibly do within Diablo 4. We are going to actually list these by tiers, so that's something to think about when you are watching this video. Whether or not you do agree, let me know down below and we can talk about what is good and what's not. We are first going to talk about S tier dungeons. Now when it comes down to farming, I want something a bit exciting and has a lot of XP as well, and Onyx Hold does exactly that. You can find a vast majority of enemies either grouped up or sometimes they'll randomly spawn in on your location. Either or, you'll find this place almost like a vacation trip from grinding. There's some events, of course, that contain waves, and this is where you will gather most of your XP from. Now, as I do show you each location, it is a great idea to pay attention to the bottom portion there where my XP bar is so you can see exactly what I'm gaining from this. Especially when I cut to the different clips, you're going to see a drastic change in the bar. This is all due to this location right here because as you can tell on the top right, there's a lot of red dots there, and this is where all the enemies are currently. You can take them out, of course participate in the events that I just mentioned a few seconds ago, and also the quicker that you're at it, the more XP you will grab. Continue on towards the second location, which is going to be Earthen Wound. This right here is another fantastic spot because you are able to grab a good amount of XP just like the previous dungeon. What I was able to gather was about 900k. Now you will be able to gather a lot more, especially if you're on a team. And plus the elixirs, of course, we cannot forget about that. So that's something to consider when you are doing these nightmares, is to absolutely make sure that you're using those elixirs. Of course, if you want to do non-nightmare dungeons, you can farm that, and there is an excellent glitch method. I'll leave a link down below if you want to see that. Yet continuing on here, it's a pretty straight path because when you are in this dungeon, you just head straight forward. Each section kind of has this like barricade that you have to take down, and then the enemies spawn in right afterwards. What you can tell right here on the map, as I just mentioned a few seconds ago, is it is a straightforward path. This makes this dungeon pretty much ideal when it comes down to farming. There's no backtracking really, which is what a lot of dungeons are sort of like. Overall, making this the perfect S tier dungeon. Continuing on with the S tiers, I'm going to show you just a few on the map here that you can absolutely try out, and it's perfect, just similar to the other dungeons that I just talked about. For example, Alderwood, which is at the top. We have the canals, which I won't even pronounce the first part of that. I'm not sure if it's Gulran. Just throwing a random guess out there. Then on the bottom portion here, we have two more, which is Ruins of Erudu, and the top one right here, which is Blind Burrows. These are my personal favorites, yet I would like to know if you agree or disagree. We are now going to continue on towards the A tier. This is where it might be a little bit debatable amongst y'all, so let's go ahead and talk about it right now. We are going to go over here towards the bottom portion, and we want to locate this dungeon, which is Mogan's Work, or Works. Tomato, tomato. Either or, this dungeon is great, yet sort of low when it comes down to acquiring a good amount of XP. For example, I was able to gather about a 500,000 to 600k. This solely depends on the events and how many enemies were present during that event, because of course the more enemies you take out, the more XP you're able to pick up. And with that, this is why it is considered an A tier dungeon. There are some groups that do stick pretty close together. Nothing like prior, yet it's still worth attempting at. There are some chances of legendaries dropping, just like other dungeons. I would not say this is as efficient when it comes down to farming for legendaries specifically, yet it's great for XP and I highly recommend it. Not to mention the boss is pretty easy to defeat, also depending on your build and whatever benefits are presented in this dungeon. For example, I think this one was Frost for me. Anyways, continuing on towards the next dungeon, you can find this towards the top portion here of the map, and this can be found towards the north. If you look right here, we are now at Sunken Ruins. This dungeon right here is not too shabby. I enjoy it quite a lot because of how many enemies are grouped together. It can be kind of annoying because this is one of those dungeons where you sort of backtrack, which in my opinion definitely plays a factor whether or not a dungeon is considered top tier. So for this, I don't think it's that great. Yet when it comes down to picking XP, it is. It's just the backtracking, which is probably the most annoying part about a majority of these dungeons. So it is what it is. And not to mention, the boss is pretty easy. So you're not going to struggle when you do encounter him at the end of the dungeon. You'll be able to smooth right through. So what you can tell right here on the bottom, the progress bar for the XP is pretty far up. Not as crazy as the dungeons before, yet still worth attempting at. And last but not least for the A tier list, and last but not least, we have the dungeon right at the top here, which is going to be Core Dragon Barracks. This is pretty good actually, which I was surprised when I first attempted at it. The only issue that I could possibly pinpoint in this dungeon is the backtracking. It's kind of annoying to go to one area, then to the other to release these chains so that I can finally have access to the gate. I don't know, after a while these backtracking dungeons can become quite tiresome and boring, and you probably end up losing motivation after a little bit. I know I did. I definitely just don't like going backwards and forwards and all over the place. Just give me some cool stuff to do and I'll be happy with it. And now we are at B tier. There are a few reasons as to why Lost Archive is decent. What I've tend to notice is that the large groups are pretty low here, which means less XP, and to add on to this, you're going to spend a lot of time exploring because of how big this dungeon is. We do not want dungeons like this because most likely you will end up spending more time walking around and exploring the dungeon than you would be slaying demons, barbarian, goats, and all that good stuff. And even though the map size is pretty big, you should be able to go around here and grab a good amount of experience. Just make sure that you do take advantage of those events. I cannot say it enough because this is where you will be able to pick up a good amount of experience because of how many enemies can spawn in, which you can tell right here on the bottom portion. The experience again is not bad at all. We are almost towards a Paragon point, about halfway, almost there. And last but not least, for B tier, we have this other dungeon, which is Zenith. I believe that's how you pronounce it. This can be found towards the top right, pretty close to Kyovashad, and this can be accessed early. Although if you're on tier 4, you will be acquiring more XP, which this brings up a great topic to talk about. Because if you're on world tier 3, you're going to notice less XP, because on world tier 4, you acquire a lot more. I forget the percentage. I know that it shows it on the screen when you do click on it. I just don't have it at the top of my head right now. Yet you're able to pick up a lot more XP on world tier 4 than you would on world tier 3, world tier 2, and obviously world tier 1. Now, if you do attempt this on world tier 1 or world tier 2, you should see a good amount of XP, just not as much as you would if you were on those higher tiers. This is something to consider when you do initiate any type of farming. And speaking of farming, I just don't think this dungeon really cuts it out for a good amount of XP as it would in the previous one. Yet it's a lot better considering the other dungeons that I'm going to show you here soon, which is definitely F tier. This one could possibly fall in that category. It really just depends on how you feel about it. This is why I want you guys to talk about it and we can really discuss what's the best dungeon. And now we are finally at the F tier. What's interesting about this is I'm only going to show you one dungeon because that's pretty much all I need to do in order to show you how terrible these last 4 to 3 dungeons are. Which you can tell right here, when we enter in, there's not going to be an excessive amount of enemies or grouped together. Not only that, the XP is absolutely terrible, so you do want to avoid this one at all costs. It's not worth it. I would probably just scrap this sigil down instead of doing it, although you can complete it so that you can level up your glyphs, but honestly, you're probably better off doing another dungeon instead. That's just my honest opinion. And here are a few other dungeons that you should absolutely avoid if you have them as sigils. You can, of course, scrap them down and then craft some new ones. The Dark Ravine I would recommend avoiding, as well as Prison of Kaldum, which can be found here at the bottom left. And then we have the Black Asylum, which is found on the right side of the map, pretty close to Kyovashad. And that's pretty much the tier list. I'm interested in what you all think, so let me know down below. Or if you have a question, you can definitely ask it there as well. Most importantly, if you're not subscribed, you can click the red subscription button. It's completely free. Make sure that you are notified by all by clicking the notification bell. And most importantly, thank you to everyone that is currently subscribed and is a member. Appreciate you all that have currently came by. If you're not subscribed, I appreciate you still coming by to watch the videos. Thank you all, and I'll see you all in the next one.